What's up guys, how you doing? Welcome to another video. So today I thought I would take a couple of minutes to talk about the release yesterday of the new Canon R5 and R6 mirrorless cameras. Wow, they both look really cool, they look incredible, so I thought I would have a look today and talk about which one I think is going to be best for sports. If you're excited about the release of those two cameras, the R5 or R6, make sure you hit the like button on this video, comment below, let me know what you think you're going to be doing. Are you going to be pre-ordering the R5, the R6? Are you going to be selling your 1DX, your EOS R? What's your thoughts? What are you going to do? Is it time to buy a new camera? Is it time to switch? Or are you actually not that impressed? Going to hold fire until maybe the price is a little bit cheaper and then consider something there? Let me know in the comments below. So look, before I start talking about the two cameras, I think it's really important that I say I haven't had hands on either of the two cameras. I certainly hope to. I'd love to be able to do some kind of review for one or even both of them, maybe on the channel, but we'll have to see how that goes. This is purely my opinion from having looked a lot at all the specs and read a fair bit on the two cameras, or prior to the launch yesterday, but also since then as well. This is simply my opinion, nothing's set in stone. It doesn't mean it's absolute gospel. Who knows? Go and have a read up for yourself. If you're interested, I'm going to link the Canon website in my description so you can go and have a read and learn a bit more about them if you would like to. So the Canon R5 and R6. So wow, two incredible looking mirrorless cameras, and a lot of you guys who watch my channel will know that not too long ago I got myself an EOS R to try to kind of dabble a little bit in the Canon mirrorless system and see what I thought, and I've got to say I've been really impressed with several aspects of it, especially the autofocus has been incredible, but there are some things about the EOS R which make it a bit of a challenge when using it to shoot sport. I did a video, I think it absolutely could be used to shoot sports, but there are some restrictions with it as well, and I've got to say pretty much everything that I thought was a struggle with the EOS R to shoot sports seems to have been addressed looking at the R5 and R6. So what I'm going to do is just kind of pick out a few of the key specs that I feel are relevant to sports, right? I'm not going to talk about some things. Yes, there's some incredible specs with that R5. You can shoot 8K video, all kinds of stuff like that, but for me right now that isn't necessarily relevant to what I'm talking about or relevant to sports, so I won't factor that in. Although of course those video capabilities with the R5 might be a key factor that would swing someone deciding whether the R5 or the R6 was right for them if you do a lot of video alongside your sports photography, like I do for example. But even having just said that, I think the R6 looks incredible. So let's start to look at the two cameras. So let's jump straight on one of the things which we talked about being a problem with the EOS R when it comes to shooting sports, and that's the frame rate of the camera. So when you've got it set up in servo mode, you can only get 5 frames per second from it, and that makes it a little bit restricted. The R5 and R6 both can shoot 12 frames per second on the mechanical shutter or 20 frames per second on the electronic shutter. Now for sports, you would mostly be wanting to use that mechanical shutter. That's just due to, in very simple terms, with the electronic shutter and things that are moving fast like you get in sports, sometimes you get a bit of a problem with like a rolling shutter effect in your photos. I'm not going to talk about that too much now, I'm not an expert in it, but that means that you would probably be looking at the mechanical shutter. But 12 frames per second for both of them, God, that's great. I think that would be totally fine, which means in terms of that issue with the EOS R, that makes both the R5 and R6 really capable cameras in terms of the frame rate for sport. So let's get on to talking about the photos, the images themselves. Quite a big difference between the two cameras here. The R5 produces 45 megapixel photos, so hefty images coming out of that camera, whereas the R6 produces 20 megapixels. Now, you might think that's a huge jump, but bear in mind, 20 megapixels is about the same as the 1DX Mark III, so that's not necessarily an issue for sports especially. It might be more of an issue for people who are looking at like portraits or weddings or things where they really need to be able to get that absolute detail out of the images. That might be more of a bigger factor to consider. But when you're looking specifically at sports, 20 megapixels is fine. I don't think that is anything to be concerned about. And where of course it does then have an effect is the buffering and the buffer capabilities of both cameras. Now I've looked this up on my phone, my memory isn't that great, so let's have a quick read. So the R5 producing the files that side, that can maintain maintain that shooting speed for 350 JPEGs before you start to get buffering issues, or 180 raw images. Now, this is where the R6 actually has quite a big advantage, because with the R6 and the 20.1 megapixel photos, it can maintain bursts of over 1000 JPEGs and 240 RAWs. So if you are shooting a lot of frames and you're shooting sports, that's probably where the R6 actually has a real advantage. Although that said, if there was somebody that told me 350 photos in JPEG wasn't enough, I'd be genuinely interested to hear why, like where they thought they would be taking more than 350 photos in that shorter period of time. But nonetheless, this is where the R6 has a definite advantage when it comes to that. Okay, so moving into the autofocus. Now, both these two cameras have the base same autofocus system, and that's the dual pixel CMOS or CMOS AF2, I think it's called. Phase detect technology, I believe, is the official phrase. And another key bit is that they also both have what Canon call their deep learning autofocus technology, which the 1DX Mark III has. So that's quite a big thing there with that autofocus. That tells me that both these two cameras should be really, really capable autofocus for sports. The autofocus in the EOS R was an area that I already found to be great, so I think that could be a real good position. It sounds to me like they're gearing it up that really the autofocus will be the same as the 1DX Mark III. Arguably even better when also it includes this thing called animal autofocus tracking, which the 1DX Mark III doesn't have, but both these two cameras do. So both the two camera bodies have what you call like full frame autofocus coverage, as in all the way to the edges of the frame. Getting a bit technical again, if we just have a look at the official numbers, the actual autofocus positions vary a little bit between the two bodies. They're both substantial, but the R5 offers 5,940 autofocus points for still photography, whereas the R6 actually has the advantage here as well, 6,072 autofocus points. Another thing where the R6 really comes into play here is that it has better autofocus at low light due to the increased ISO sensitivity. I won't start breaking down numbers on ISO levels, but basically the R6 has slightly better low light capability and more ISO sensitivity. That is, without getting technical because I'm not a technical expert with cameras, but that's to do with the number of sensors in the camera, because it's 20 megapixels as opposed to 45, which I believe means like each one can draw in more light, which means it has better ISO capability. So of course, as well as the autofocus benefits there, that's also another benefit with sports, with the fact that we are so often shooting under low lights when it comes to floodlights, indoors, whatever else it might be. Now let's just touch a little bit on those file sizes. We mentioned them earlier on, but one thing to consider here, of course, is that where the R5 really comes into its own there is the cropping capability of that camera. If you get a frame down the far end of the field or down the far end of a court somewhere, you're going to be able to crop that right in, and it's not going to make much difference to the image quality. You could knock out about half that frame size and you're still going to be getting the same size of image as you're getting already from the R6. And that's a real benefit, right? That means you've probably got the capability to shoot a little bit wider if you need to, get more in the frame, and then crop in afterwards. And whilst I do think that 20 megapixels is enough for sports, it would be wrong of us to dismiss that 45, because of course there are absolutely advantages that come with having 45 megapixel photos coming out of that camera. It's incredible. Just to touch a little bit physically on the cameras, they're largely the same. What they do both have, which really excites me, it took me a while with the EOS R to get used to like the little touch bar and the dials on the back. That's probably because alongside that I'm using my 1DX and my 7D Mark II. Now the cool thing here is that both these cameras bring back the little joystick thing and the twisty dial on the back, which if you are a Canon user like myself, you will be more than familiar with. I think that's going to make me feel more natural on the back of the camera. When I switch from my EOS R to my 1DX, I kind of notice that I'm having to do different stuff on the back of the cameras, and I think that would be cool to have them much more similar, and just something that I am more familiar with using and feels more comfortable in my hand. The cameras are physically largely the same. One difference difference is that the R5 has the screen on the top like the EOS R does, whereas the R6 doesn't. The R6 has like the twisty dial on the top that you'll be familiar with most Canon cameras, where you kind of manually click from mode to mode. Again, because I'm quite used to that, I probably will like that. I'll probably like the kind of tactileness of that in my hand, so that's not a downside for me. The screen on top of the EOS R has been cool, but I don't look at it and think, oh, it's so much better than when the dial was there. It's kind of indifferent to me, really, that one. Quickly touch on connectivity, which can be a big thing for sports photographers. Both the cameras have Wi-Fi, but one distinct advantage here of the R5 is that you can plug the Ethernet straight into the camera. Now, when it comes to sending images from pitch side, that can be a huge advantage, something the R6 doesn't do. So that could really be quite an important thing for sports photographers working high-level pitch side and sending images live as quick as they can. Okay, a big difference between the two cameras is the price points, right? Now, as we stand, I've looked on Jessop's as like a kind of middle of the, middle of the road, well-known company selling cameras. The R5 is listed for £4,199, whereas the R6 is, I think, a pretty good price point of £2,499. Now, it's not quite half price. In fact, it's a good couple of £100 off half price, but that's nearly half the price of the R5. And that's quite a big factor, and I've got to say, for me, that's probably going to be a really big factor, because whilst I would love the extra megapixels just because I can, I'd love the Ethernet cable and everything like that, I think actually that price point, for me, shooting sports, bearing in mind everything else I've just talked about, makes that R5 look really attractive. So to summarise which one I think would be better for sports, well, you know what, actually, looking at all the specs, they both prove themselves as being really capable sports cameras. I think probably the honest answer is that for professionals and people who are doing it as a high-end full career, the R5 is probably going to be the way that they go. It would almost seem silly to turn down those extra megapixels, things like the Ethernet connector, those kind of things. They might seem like smaller points, but they're really important when literally your livelihood depends on it. I also imagine that there will be plenty of pros, perhaps with tighter budgets, and that includes myself, who will look at that R6 and think, you know what, that is a perfectly capable professional or maybe semi-pro, some people might call it, but professional sports camera. I really think it could do the job. And certainly for most sports photography, action, wildlife enthusiasts who aren't necessarily doing it as their main profession, I think it's going to be a more than capable camera. And for the difference in the two price points, I think that's where the R6 is really going to step forwards. The autofocus, the speed of the camera, they're both going to be fine for that, so it's not like there's one or the other that jumps out as being the main one there for me. Although I haven't looked into it yet, I'm sure you'll be able to get all the other accessories that are useful for sports, the grips and stuff like that. Of course, there's a whole range of lenses been announced today as well. I'm not going to get into those, but as per my experience of using the EF lenses on the adapter on the RF mount, it's been absolutely fine, so I don't think anyone would need to be worried about attaching it to their EF lenses, their 400mm, whatever else. I think it'll work absolutely fine, and certainly whichever camera I intend to go for, whether I stick with my EOS R for now, get myself an R6 or an R5, I certainly will be using my EF lenses at least to start with. So there we go, guys. Look, just a little bit of a summary kind of roundup video, really just sharing my thoughts. Make sure you go read up on the cameras yourself, but do let me know in the comments what you're thinking, what you're going to do, whether it means it's time to get the new camera or whether or not you're going to hold off. I would be really interested to hear from all of you guys about that. In the meantime, guys, make sure you hit that like button for me if you enjoyed the video. I really appreciate it because it helps me out loads. Think about subscribing if you haven't already, and I will see you guys. I will see you on the next video.